Mindful Happy Kids, created and narrated by Dr. Elizabeth Page, consists of interviews with children's authors and poets and illustrators, musicians of all types, and yoga and mindfulness practitioners. Dr. Page also reads from her own children's books on compassion, gratitude, mindfulness, and yoga. Pippi the puppy and Dr. Page practice meditations or pet-centered meditations, which are recorded as part of the videos. Hi, Rajani LaRocca. I'm so excited
Hello.
for you to be here. It's been a while, and I'm really looking forward to having you on my show. So
I'm
welcome.
excited to be here. Thank you.
Would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Rajani LaRocca. I am a doctor and a children's book author, and I live in the Boston area.
Well, that was that's a brief. She's a Harvard-educated doctor, which of course you wouldn't put in, but I will definitely let the people know. And your parents immigrated from India.
Yeah. Yeah. I came to the United States when I was a baby, and I got back into writing, let's see, I don't know, 13 years ago. And since 2019, I've published about 15 books. So 10 picture books and 5 novels for young readers, and with more on the way.
You have four on the way?
With more on the way.
Oh, with more on the way. I thought you said you had four on the way. So do you want to take us through your writing journey?
Yeah, so I was a kid who loved books. I read all kinds of books when I was young. I liked fiction and nonfiction. I liked novels. I liked picture books. I liked comic books. Um, and I also like to write. But I fell in love with science pretty early on in my life. It was actually a book that got me interested in becoming a doctor. And so by the time I was in high school, I thought, I was pretty sure that I wanted to go into medicine. And so I thought that writing was not going to be such a big part of my life. And I told my creative writing teacher in high school this, and he said, "Who says you have to choose?" And he brought in all these books the next day who were written by authors who happened to be doctors. And it planted a seed in my head. And I was like, okay, so maybe this is something I can come back to. So I continued to write in college, but then I went to medical school, and that was the end of writing for a while. And then residency was equally exhausting. And then I had my first child, so I was busy. And so in about 2011, when my, kids were in school and I had been practicing medicine for a while, I started to think about going back to something that I loved, just for me, something creative. And so I started taking some writing classes. And then initially, I did not really consider that I wanted to be published. I thought it was just going to be for me to have fun with. But then I met a lot of other writers. We formed critique groups, and everyone was kind of like marching forward, and everyone was, asking me what was going to happen next in my book. So I had to like keep going. And then eventually it became apparent that I wanted to write books for kids. And, unless I wanted my children to be the only ones to ever read them, I figured I should try to get published. So then I got serious about getting published, kind of improving my craft as much as I could. And eventually, I signed with an agent, and, the rest is history, 15 books later.
15 wonderful books, I must say.
Oh, thank you.
It's been super fun to read them.
Thank you so much.
So it's evident that Southeast Asian culture is real important to you because it comes up in all of your books. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and what brought you to a point of wanting to include it in all of your books.
Well, what's really interesting is that when I first started writing, most of the stories that I thought about writing were not about people like me. They were about white people. And I think that was because that's pretty much what I had read, especially when I was growing up. Um, but the more I thought about it, the more I was like, well, why wouldn't I want my stories to star someone like me? I was a kid who loved all kinds of books, but I never saw a book about somebody like me who shared my experience, an Indian person growing up in the United States until I was an adult. And I didn't realize what I had been missing until that point, and it was kind of like a big moment for me. So then eventually, when I started writing, I was like, okay, so like maybe I should write stories about stuff that I know about firsthand. Um, and so that's how it started. And I think it's really important for every kid, especially, but every person to be able to see themselves in the pages of a story. I think it's equally important for people who are not exactly like me to see themselves in the pages of my stories, right? Because we share a lot in common, whether you're Indian American or not.
Great. And you also have a lot of strong female characters, I've noticed.
Thanks. I mean, I don't think we can have enough of strong female characters. I think that, growing up in the 70s and 80s, a lot of the books I read were all starring boys, right? And which was fine, right? But also, it made me wonder, like, do girls get to be the heroes of stories? Do girls get to, save everybody? Did they get to have adventures? And so that tends to be where, my characters tend to be girls.
Yeah, I noticed that. And family tends to be really strong also.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just about everything I write comes from a place of wonder and joy, and family has always been a source of great joy for me, from when I was a kid and all the way through now. Absolutely.
Right? What you know, right?
Yeah, and families, that doesn't mean that all the families in my books get along well or understand each other perfectly, right? That's, not true. It's not true about the real world. But underneath everything, there is a very strong bond of love. And so that means that if even if there are misunderstandings and misinterpretations, that you can find your way through them because you love each other.
Exactly. So you write both middle grade novels and you write picture books. So
Mhm.
let's start with the middle grade novels.
Sure.
So why middle grade novels?
Oh, I think middle grade is where it's at. I mean, I think that age is when kids learn and grow so much. And they're obviously friendships continue, like start to be very important in their lives, but they're still tied to family. And I think that in middle grade novels, I don't know how to explain it. I feel like you have to just tell the truth. You have to talk about real kind of emotions that people have, real fears that they have, real joys that they experience. And the characters are also trying to figure out their place in the world and kind of what they think about the world. Middle grade readers tend to have a really strong sense of justice. And so I just love writing for that age group.
Do you spend a lot of time reading middle grade novels?
I do. I do. I mean, in fact, I think middle grade novels have kind of ruined me for much of adult literature because you have to get to the point quickly with middle grade novels and you have to be engaging immediately. So it's hard for me to like read 100 pages of an adult book and be like, I don't even know what's happening here. Why is it taking so long?
Oh, I've actually said that before. I keep on saying that I have the attention span of middle grade novel.
Right? It's so funny.
I
But yeah,
know my
I
all
love
my books here are like, four-fifths of them are middle grade novels.
it. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. I know. It's great.
So you write some books in verse, some books in prose, both one from one perspective, one point of view, and from multiple points of view. And then you have a book that's completely multimedia. So what makes you choose one type of format for each book? And
Yeah.
what are sort of the pros and challenges for each of the formats?
Yeah, so I think that usually the format of the book kind of like when the idea comes to me, it kind of the format also comes to me. In general, like my first couple of novels were written in prose and they tend to be um plot heavy, and there's humor, and they tend to be kind of lighthearted. And so uh it made sense to write them like that. And then when I came up with the idea for Red, White, and Whole, I mean, the idea came to me as a metaphor. It was the metaphor of blood and all that it means in terms of family, biology, community. But I also knew it was going to be an emotional story. And so I thought that verse might be the right way to write it, so that it's not too overwhelming, because you can kind of address challenging or heavy topics in verse in a way that leaves space on the page and also leaves space in the person's heart and in their minds to kind of, you know, figure out and process what's going on. Um,
That's
and
interesting.
yeah, and same with Mirror to Mirror. I would say that, that is a more emotional story. And originally interesting, Mirror to Mirror is the story about identical twin sisters, one of whom is struggling with anxiety. And originally I wrote it so that one sister's voice was in poetry and the other one was in prose. But then it was hard to write that way, like going back and forth. And my editor thought that it would be better if both of them were in verse, and I agreed. So that was interesting because I was like, okay, I mean, they're identical twins. I'm writing both voices in verse, but I have to differentiate the voices somehow. So that was interesting. And then The Secret of the Dragon Gems, which I co-wrote with Chris Barron, um, it always started off as this kind of epistolary novel. Like basically, we're long distance friends, and the characters in the book are long distance friends. And so they communicate with, via letter and email and text and then video chat. But then we had all these other elements to the story that we wanted to bring to light. So The Secret of the Dragon Gems, there are these two kids who meet at summer camp, and they find these interesting rocks on the last night, and they each go home. One goes to California, one goes to Massachusetts, and then they start communicating with each other because weird things keep happening, and they wonder whether the rocks are actually just rocks. So we also brought in kind of excerpts from the kids' favorite fantasy series, which is called the Dragon Gems. Me Too videos of like a fandom for the Dragon Gems. We just had a great time with that book. And it made sense because we wanted to tell the story kind of in a back and forth kind of way.
It also, I go back and forth. Usually I read books, but that one I just happened to get the audiobook for, and that was such a good choice because that
It's an
audiobook was
amazing
awesome.
it's an amazing audiobook. It is multicast, so there are, multiple actors doing the roles, and it's
And the
absolutely a
music
joy.
and the interludes, and it was just incredible. I highly recommend anyone who's listening to this that instead of reading the Dragon Gems, that they get the audiobook and listen to it.
It's really fun. Or they could do both if they want to.
Follow along as you're listening to
That's right.
it. So let's talk about Much Ado About Baseball and Midsummer's Mayhem. I'm
Mhm.
going to try to do this without spoiling it because I want people to read it, but it's very hard. I was trying to come up with questions without spoiling it, and it was very hard. So, do you want to give the context of the book, or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, I can do it. So Midsummer's Mayhem is briefly, it is a Midsummer Night's Dream meets Cupcake Wars in a middle grade setting. So it's about an 11-year-old girl named Mimi who loves to bake, but she feels a little bit lost and forgotten in her own family because she's got three older siblings who are super amazing at all that they do. And there's a new bakery in town, and she learns that there's going to be a Midsummer's baking contest for kids. And she figures that if she could just win this contest, she can finally prove that she is not the least talented member of her family. But then her dad, who is a food writer and usually helps her with her recipes, comes back from a business trip, and he's acting really weird, and he cannot tell the difference between delicious food and disgusting food. And without his help, she has no idea how she's going to win the contest. So then she follows some mysteriously familiar music into the woods behind her house, and she meets a boy named Vic who also loves to bake, and together they gather like herbs and spices from the forest and they bake with them. And then everyone around her starts acting very, very strange. So Mimi's got to figure out what is wrong with everyone. Can she fix it? And can she win the baking contest? And
And
then
what
you want me to tell
about,
you Much Ado About Baseball?
sure?
Yeah, so Much Ado About Baseball is set in the same Massachusetts town as Midsummer's Mayhem during the same summer, but it has different kid characters and different magical characters. And it is about a girl and a boy, Trish and Ben, who are math competition rivals who find themselves on the same summer baseball team. And they kind of can't stand each other, but they have to find a way to work with each other for the good of the team. So there's a bunch of different elements here. There's like a really cool sporty boy who's like, oh, my family has a snack shop, and if you go and eat snacks from there, I'm telling you, your team's gonna win. And they're like, okay, but sure enough, they start eating snacks from there, and their team starts winning. Then they get some mysterious math puzzle booklets in their mailboxes, and they start solving the puzzles. And as long as they keep solving the puzzles, they keep winning. But then they get to a puzzle that they can't solve, and something terrible happens. And so they have to work together to solve the final kind of puzzle. And the question is, will they find a way to be teammates, or will they strike out when it counts the most?
And they're intertwining. That's the part that was so incredibly brilliant.
Oh, you're sweet. You mean the dual POV, or you mean the two stories?
The two stories.
Oh yeah, yeah. They're related to each other, but like I said, so you'll see cameos from Midsummer's Mayhem in the Much Ado About Baseball book, but you can read it by itself as well.
Yes, you can read it by itself, but I read one, then I read the other, and then I was like, comedy. Wait a second. I was like, then there were some familiar names, and I was like,
yeah, it's the same
so I
place.
reread the first one, and I was like, oh, so you have to sort of, I recommend just keeping in mind both books as you're reading them, and reading them twice, and then you get the full experience. But
Oh, thank you.
they were brilliantly intertwined, and it was really fun. So why
Thank you.
Shakespeare? Why Shakespeare, and why these particular plays?
Oh, I've loved Shakespeare since like sixth grade. We read A Midsummer Night's Dream and performed it in sixth grade, and I just was completely smitten. And then in my school, we read at least one Shakespeare play from sixth grade through the end of high school. And so I've read a lot of Shakespeare, and these are my two favorite Shakespeare plays are Midsummer Night's Dream and Much Ado About Nothing. So in case you can't tell, Much Ado About Baseball has a little bit of the plot elements of Much Ado About Nothing. So yeah, I mean, I love the language. I love the fact that the characters that Shakespeare created are, still ring true hundreds of years later. I love the infinite variations on settings and situations that his plays present. So, yeah, this is my Shakespeare inspired collection, these two books.
Magic all over the place, all over your books.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I loved reading about magical things. So I would say that Midsummer's Mayhem and Much Ado About Baseball are they're contemporary fantasy. So they're set in the real world, but there's some magic that kind of sneaks in, and there's some magical elements. But they're very much like, real people in the real world kind of books. And then The Secret of the Dragon Gems is also like contemporary fantasy slash sci-fi, because there is it's really definitely set in the real world and kids dealing with real world problems. And then there's some kind of funny speculative stuff that goes on. And then my forthcoming book, Sona and the Golden Beast, coming out March 5th, 2024, so in a couple of weeks, is my first otherworld fantasy. And it is set in an Indian-inspired fantasy world in which it's the country of Devia, and the native people there, the Devans, practice magic through music. But the colonial invaders, the Malaks, who have been there for a couple of hundred years, have outlawed music so that the Devans can't cast their magic. And Sona, the protagonist of the story, is a girl who is in a Malak family. So she's grown up as part of the people who colonize the area, but she really loves a particular Devan woman who helped raise her. She's like a grandmotherly figure. And Sona hears music, even though it's been outlawed. So the story kind of starts when Sona finds an orphaned wolf pup in her barn, and the pup has golden ears. And Sona thinks that because of this, it is related to one of the five sacred beasts of Davia. And when somebody that she loves falls ill, she has to go across the country with a Daven boy to find the nectar of life to save this person. And so she's trying to protect everyone from this Malekian hunter who's after all of the golden beasts. He's been killing them one by one. And along the way, she discovers secrets about the Malekian Empire and about her own identity. And so instead of she sets out to save one person, but she might end up needing to save the whole country.
Wow. Sounds
So I'm
great.
very excited.
Can't wait to read
Thank
it.
you. Thank
I'll
you.
review it on the website.
Oh, wonderful.
So
Thank you.
watch out. After I put the profile on, I'll put a book review on the website so that people can read about it.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I'm glad you brought up music because music
Yeah.
is also an important theme through your books. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, music has been important to me all of my life. I grew up singing and playing the piano, and I have two very musical kids. My husband is very musical. I grew up in the 80s, and 80s music has just been like a huge influence on me, something that is I'm still nostalgic for. Red, White, and Whole includes a lot of references to 80s music, references to specific songs, mixtapes, and all that kind of stuff. I really do think that music speaks to us in a way that words cannot sometimes. Music can kind of stir the soul and capture our hearts. Music is also an incredible way to understand somebody else's culture. I think food is the same way. So yeah, music is very important to me in my life. And so it plays a role in many, many of my books.
Yeah, and food does also.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was sitting there, I'm like, all right, it's time to go get some Indian food.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I love food, and I really also think that that uh food is just like such a great gateway into a culture. I'm not saying that it's the only gateway, but I'm saying that it's a great thing. If you can enjoy somebody else's food, you understand something and you've made a connection with them. So yeah, and I love baking and I love cooking. So Midsummer's Mayhem, as you know, is about a girl who loves to bake, but Much Ado About Baseball also features food and it tends to be on the salty side. Red, White, and Whole involves a lot of mention of food. Part of what Reha, the main character in the book, thinks about is the concept of home and how her mom's cooking, in particular, just brings her right back to home. That will always be home to her. Yeah, and a lot of my picture books have food in them too because I love food. I mean, who doesn't?
Well, I do.
Good.
I have to say, I was
That's why I
like,
like you.
oh, you talked a little bit about competition in Midsummer's Mayhem and Red, White, and Much Ado About Baseball. Do you want to talk a little bit about competition, or was that just like a friendly competition? Because baseball is also competitive.
Oh, you mean the concept of competition in that book?
Yeah, in those two books.
Yeah. So, oh yeah, that's so interesting. So I would say that in Midsummer's Mayhem, um, the competition is really Mimi against herself, right? Mimi is trying to prove something to herself that she's like worthy of being in her family, and she thinks that by winning a contest, she's going to do it, right? Um, so, I would say that the character arc or the growth of that character in that book has to do with understanding that she doesn't have to win anything to be worthy of being in her family, right? And that her family loves her no matter what. But she needs to internalize that. And in Much Ado About Baseball, oh man, it is really um I love the idea of competitors who find a way to understand that competition is not really the only thing that is important. So what I would say is that in Much Ado About Baseball, I think between Trish and Ben, because Trish won the math competition, before the book starts, I think that she's like very friendly towards Ben because she was always impressed, by his math skills. Whereas Ben feels like he has a big chip on his shoulder and he's like, how could this girl beat me? And now she's here and like I don't even want to be on this baseball team and now like I can't even quit because she's here. So it was delicious to write that tension between them because she's like, hey, oh, isn't it great? Like we have something in common and we have like a lot in common and we should be friends. And he is like, I don't want anything to do with you. Like you embarrassed me, and because you embarrassed me, I have to be on this baseball team and I don't want to be on this baseball team. So um that was really fun to write. And that's kind of like the inspiration from Much Ado About Nothing. It's the same thing. You know, there's such like repartee between those characters, Beatrice and Benedict, in the play. So that was really fun. But they also, those kids at heart are really not about just winning, right? They've each got to figure out something about themselves as well. And Ben's got to kind of get over why it is he stopped playing baseball. He's got to like admit that and figure out how to heal from that. And then the math puzzles are great because it used to be something that kind of they were competing against each other for, but by the end of the book, they're working together on that last puzzle that they can't figure out. So yeah, it's really great. And I think that both of those books kind of, they bring forth the notion that competition is great and it's fun, but it's not the point of anything.
Yes. How's that? Yes.
It's not the be all end all.
I'm going to talk a little bit about Red, White, and Whole and Mirror to Mirror now.
Mhm.
Now, you talk about discrimination about Indians. Has that been your experience?
I'm sorry, what do you mean? Like from other people?
Yeah, from other people.
Well, I mean, I think that everybody who is not in the majority has experienced everything from microaggressions to outright racism at some point in their life, right? But Red, White, and Whole, so Red, White, and Whole is set in 1983. It's about a 13-year-old girl named Reha who feels torn between the worlds of her Indian immigrant parents and her friends at school who are mainly white. And, like any normal American teen, she wants to listen to cool music, wear awesome clothes, go to a middle school dance. But her parents, and especially her mom, feel like she has better things to do with her time. So Reha is struggling with this when she learns that her mom has been diagnosed with leukemia, and her whole world turns upside down. And she feels guilty about all the other things that she's been thinking about instead of her mom. And she thinks that if she could just be the perfect daughter, the daughter that her parents want her to be, that she can somehow save her mom's life. Now, what I will say is that I think that while Reha does experience some othering on the part of other people in this book, most of her struggles are internal. Most of her struggles are about, am I American or am I Indian? How come I want to be like all my friends and my parents want me to be something different? Where do I actually belong? Which version of me is the real me? Those are the main struggles, especially at the beginning of the book, that she's undergoing. So while there are definitely people who aren't asking the best questions or treating her like she's from another planet, most of her struggles are internal ones.
Yeah. Are those struggles that you've had in your life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of the emotions from Red, White, and Whole were lifted right from my own life.
Indian values are also extremely important
Hmm.
in Red, White, and Whole, and in Mirror to
Hmm.
Mirror, where
Hmm.
it's talking about things like an expectation of perfectionism and an expectation of living within modest values. But
Hmm.
it seems like the young characters, are internalizing it to an extreme. Like Maya in Mirror to Mirror definitely internalized the anxiety of her mother to an extreme.
Yeah. Well, I think that in that family in Mirror to Mirror. So Mirror to Mirror is about identical twins, and they're both musical. They play classical piano, and they love each other very much. But one of the twins has terrible anxiety that is getting worse. And when her twin Chaya tries to tell their parents, Maya shuts her out. And so at one point in the book, Chaya says maybe the reason why my sister has such anxiety is because we're too similar. Maybe she's like feeling like we're always being compared. So maybe what I should do is just change everything about myself. So she changes the kind of music she plays. She puts a pink streak in her hair so they can't be confused anymore. But instead of bringing them closer together, it pushes them further apart. And then the last part of the book is where they make a bet when they go to their music summer camp to pretend to be each other and play each other's music, which is not easy, in order to decide like what they're going to do about high school. But along the way, they learn a lot about each other and about themselves. So, the idea of kind of expectations, parental expectations, and like um, what what each twin internalizes is very interesting because both of the twins have the same set of parents, right? And the parents definitely have high expectations, but they also love their children very, very much. But one of them has created this entire, kind of view in her head that if she is not perfect, that something terrible is going to happen. And it's irrational, and she knows it. But anxiety, often isn't rational. So that's the central problem is that she won't tell anybody about this, and she needs to in order to get help. And I think part of it is that, um, uh, as you mentioned, her mom also has a similar problem and doesn't want to talk about it and doesn't put it out there. So this is actually, it brings up something that is, not often discussed, but in immigrant communities and in people of color, mental health can be very different, or at least talking about mental health can be a very different experience from other communities. In a lot of immigrant communities, people don't want to admit that they're having any mental health struggles because it's seen as like a form of weakness. And it's like you don't want to appear weak. It's like you're here to like put your best face forward kind of thing. But in this book, in a middle grade kind of way, the whole family has to come to grips with what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw the mental health aspects and I was real happy to read about that.
Mm,
Because I think
thanks.
it's important for kids to see themselves in books like this. Why twins?
Oh, I think twins are fascinating. Shakespeare was obsessed with twins too. I interviewed a bunch of identical twins for this story, and I got to tell you, some of those stories that they told me, gave me the chills. They have A lot of them have links that it is hard to believe. It is unbelievable. And one of the things that I also found fascinating, I mean, this is true, is that twins start off genetically identical, but every time cells divide, like something changes, right? So at one point, Chaya laments that she and her twin started off identical, but with each breath, they're growing more and more different. And she wishes she could go back to the time before her sister had anxiety when they were the
Hmm,
same.
interesting. Now, we're not going to spend too much time on The Secret with the Dragon Gems because I interviewed Chris
Yeah,
and
yeah, and we talked about it a little bit already. Yeah.
we spoke about it. But from your
Yeah.
perspective, why was this book interesting to write?
Oh my gosh. It was like playing a game with a really good friend. That's what it was. We had this idea. It was a pandemic book. We had this idea, and during like in the middle of the pandemic, that first summer, he like texted me and he was like, we should do it. And I was like, yeah, yeah. And he was like, no, we should do it now. And I was like, fine. And so then we like talked and we made an outline. And then the way we wrote the book is that I would write a chapter and then I would send it to him and just say tag, and then he would have write a chapter back. It was just a complete joy. It was really, really fun to collaborate with him.
I'm sure Chris would like to know what writing the book was like for you, writing with him.
Oh, I think Chris knows. It was like a complete project of joy. Like we just had the best time. We're very we're a good team. It's funny because most of his books are really serious, right? He writes a lot of novels in verse, and they tend to be serious and emotional. And this was a romp. Like, of course, both of our characters are fleshed out and they have real issues that they're dealing with in addition to kind of the magical sci-fi stuff that is happening. But it was really, really fun. And it was interesting. Sometimes the characters have these chats or these video calls where they're going back and forth. And the way we would write them is that we would get on the phone and we would type into a Google Doc. And we knew what was going to happen in these scenes, But like it was like often my character who was like not being very nice to his character, like she just like would like get to some point where she would just snap and be like, look, I like we're not gonna go down this road anymore. Okay, this is not happening. And I would have to like we're in the middle of the scene typing the scene and I would just be like, Chris, I just want to let you know, like, I'm not being mean to you. It's the characters that are being mean to each other. But it was hard because I was like, I don't want to be mean to my friend. It was really, really funny.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So now you want to talk a little bit about some of your children's books?
Oh, sure.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
going to just let you know which ones were my favorites. And
Okay, go
then
for it.
let you talk about it. And then you can add the ones that you think were your favorites. I loved I'll Go and Come Back and Marsala Chai Fast and Slow. I think those were two of my favorites.
Oh, okay, great.
Do you want to
Yeah,
talk?
you want me to talk about them?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll Go and Come Back. Was actually the first book we ever sold. It is a story about a little girl who goes to India to visit her relatives, and she feels homesick. She feels lonely and homesick because her cousins are in school all day. But then her grandmother, her Sita Pati, spends time with her, and through reading and playing and cooking and eating, they bond, and she feels at home. And when it's time to go back home to the United States, she doesn't want to. But then the grandmother reminds her that in India, we don't say goodbye. We say poitu varai in Tamil, which means I'll go and come back. So the girl realizes, oh, this isn't like goodbye. I'm going to see you again. And then the next summer, the grandmother visits the girl in the United States and she feels lonely and homesick. And the girl helps her through all the same ways. And at the end, they say, I'll go and come back to each other. And I mean, I got this idea for this story so long ago. It was like I was very, a new writer back then. And I always knew it was going to be a mirror story about a girl going to India and then the grandmother coming to visit her in the United States. And it is inspired by and dedicated to my grandmother, whose name was Sita. And so a lot of the experience was my own experience, but some of it, I mean, it was definitely fictionalized too. But it was just like a real story of my heart. And Sarah Palacios is the illustrator, and she did just an absolutely wonderful job with it.
Yeah, it was very heartwarming. I loved
Thank
it.
you.
And what about Marcella Chai Fast and Slow?
Yeah, Masala Chai. So this is a grandfather grandson story, and it was inspired. So it's about a grandson who likes to go fast, and a grandfather who likes to take things slow. And every day they get together in the evening and make masala chai, which is, the spiced chai that Indians make for the whole family. And the grandson always wants to speed things up, and the grandfather is like, no, no, slowly, slowly, masala chai can't be rushed. So one day the grandfather sprains his ankle and he can't make masala chai, and he's just like sitting on the sofa and sleeping all day. And the grandson decides he's going to make the masala chai by himself with the help of some family members to cheer up the grandpa. And of course, it doesn't turn out as he had planned. But this is a story about remembering to slow down for the people that we love. And it was inspired by my dad, who is like the chai maker in my family. And also, as elders are often fond of saying, they always say slowly, slowly when you're rushing around as a young person. So yeah, I love this story too. It also means a lot to me.
Great. Now you also wrote a bunch of books that were clearly informed by your knowledge of the human body and medicine and
Mhm.
science.
Yeah.
And you were able to take very complex issues and write them for children and without talking down to them or preaching. So some of these books are Secret Code Inside You, all about DNA, Your One and Only Heart, A Vaccine is Like a Memory. How were you able to teach the kids the difference between fact and fiction?
Mm. Well, I mentioned earlier that it was a picture book that inspired me to go into medicine when I was a little kid. Um, and for me, science has always been a source of wonder and joy. So that is what I try to transmit to kids. And the first nonfiction picture book about science that I wrote was A Secret Code Inside You, all about your DNA. And when it showed up in my head, I was walking my dog and I thought to myself, I am a person and he is a dog. Isn't that interesting? And I was like, well, I know why, right? It's because of our DNA, right? And then I thought I heard a refrain in my head, right? There's a secret code inside you, a code called DNA. And from the beginning, it was the first picture book I ever tried to write. From the very beginning, I knew what I was trying to say, which is both that, isn't it cool how DNA is in each of our cells, that it makes us into people, it makes other animals into what they are, but also that we are not defined by our DNA, that it is our actions and what we choose to do that also affect and inform who we are. Because, for little kids, I think the world is filled with other people telling them rules, like you have to do this, you can't do this, you must do that. And I wanted to remind them that like those choices, the things that they choose to do also, make them who they are. And the book is in rhyme. It's in rhyming poetry. And for a long time, I tried to unrhyme it and it refused to be unrhymed. And I realized only later after it was published that the nucleotide base pairs in DNA always pair up the same way, just like rhyming lines do. So I think my subconscious was like, that's the way this book needs to be written. Um, in terms of Your One and Only Heart was another book that I started like a long time ago, and it took me like years to figure out how to write it, because at first I like knew all these really cool things about the heart, and basically it's an ode to the human heart in poetry, kind of paired poems of opposite characteristics. But it wasn't until like 5 years after I first wrote about it, because it was kind of just boring and I put it aside, that I realized that that was the format that I needed to use, is to take characteristics that seem to be opposite each other and write poems about them. And Lauren Page Conrad is the illustrator for that. She works in cut paper collage and her artwork is just stunning. So, for example, the heart is singular, but it is also cooperative. It is electric, but it's also muscular. It is constant, but it's also variable. I mean, I think that all of these things about the heart are so fascinating, and I hope I was able to convey that in poetry. And then there's a lot of back matter as well that kind of gives you more in-depth information. And then A Vaccine is Like a Memory was inspired by when I got my first COVID-19 vaccination. I mean, I've always been a proponent of vaccines because I know as a doctor, they are one of the greatest things that medicine has ever done for humanity, right? I mean, literally the world is different today because we aren't susceptible to so many infectious diseases that used to kill people, right? And but when I got that first vaccine, and it like changed the picture of like what it meant to be in the middle of this pandemic, I was so grateful for that. I went back and did some research on the history of vaccines and how they first came about, and I was fascinated and I was really inspired to share that with kids. One of the things I learned that I did not know beforehand is why we use the word vaccine. It is because one of the first smallpox kind of inoculations was by a doctor who realized that people who got cowpox, which was a very mild disease that like milkmaids and other people who work with cattle got, didn't get smallpox. So he thought, what if we inoculate people with this much milder disease called cowpox, and then maybe we'll save them from smallpox, which was deadly disease. And it worked. So the way you say cow in Latin is vacca. So that is why we call them vaccines. It's from cow. Isn't that really cool?
I thought so. I thought that book was
Yeah.
great. Actually, these 3 books, I was like, wow, these are totally children's books, and I am learning a lot. So it was great. It was definitely
Well, you know
great.
what? I think that's the thing. It goes to show that picture books are for everybody. And especially, I mean, like they're all for everybody, but nonfiction picture books can give you a lot of information.
And they're read by parents to kids.
Yes.
So you made them accessible for parents and not boring, and at the same time accessible to kids. So you did a great job with them. I really like them. And you
Thank
also,
you.
another children's fun book was The Seven Golden Rings. And
Hmm.
this one had math. Seems like you're a math proponent also.
Oh yeah, I'm a math and science person, in addition to a reading and writing and history person. and music and cooking.
Seems like you do a lot and think about a lot.
Yeah, well, so many things. I think the world is full of delightful things. Math is one of those delightful things. The story is set in ancient India, and it's about a boy who is poor and he's trying to um, audition for the Raja, right? He's trying to sing for the Raja, the king, in order to like save his family, basically. So he ends up being faced with this math conundrum, right? And he has to solve it in order to be successful at like staying in the city for as long as he needs to stay there. And this book was inspired by a math logic puzzle that my uncle told me when I was a kid, like decades ago, and I never forgot it. Thought it was so fascinating. And then I thought, later on, I was like, I want to write a picture book in which somebody has to solve this problem. And do you know, it was in the course of writing this picture book that I realized what the key was to solving this puzzle. And the key is binary numbers. And so I was like, that's why it works. Oh my goodness. It was so interesting. So then there's a whole back matter about the concept of binary numbers, what they mean and why we care about them. And why we care about them is because every computer, uses binary. That's at its most base level. So it was really fun to write. That was my first picture book that came out. Archana Srinivasan illustrated it, and it was a joy. And what was really funny is that my editor said to me, she's like, if you can explain binary numbers to me, you can explain it to anyone. And I was like, listen, I'm glad that we like this explanation of binary numbers, but you're a really smart person, and I know you can understand this. Like, don't be shocked because you're a word person doesn't mean that you can't understand this math concept.
That's great.
Yeah.
Are there any of the picture books that I missed that you want to talk about?
Oh boy. Well, Summer is for Cousins came out last year. It got a lot of attention. It seems to like ring true for a lot of people. My agent just asked me to write a picture book about summer. Like he said, just anything about summer because he loves summer. And I thought about it and it was like, oh my gosh, like all my favorite memories are the summers that I spent with my cousins in India. So it was inspired by that togetherness. It was inspired by my kids growing up with their cousins, some of whom are my cousin's children, which is just so cool, and our trips to Cape Cod. And that feeling of feeling shy when you see somebody you love, but you haven't seen them for a while, and you realize that they've changed and you wonder if they like still like you. And then by the end of the story, this little boy Ravi realizes that his oldest cousin has changed, but he's changed too. Like he's also grown up. So I think that it just struck a chord with a lot of people. And I think a lot of kids, I think what's really interesting is that children are nostalgic for themselves when they were younger. Like when you see a 5-year-old and they're like, when I was little, and you're like, oh my goodness. And then you're like, yeah, but you remember when you were like littler than now, and you still look back on it like I was a baby, wasn't I cute? It's so sweet. And then the other one that I should mention also is Where Three Oceans Meet, which is also illustrated by Archana Srinivasan, and it is a book about a girl who travels, who goes on a road trip in India with her mom and her grandma, and they want to go to the very tip of India to a place called Kanyakumari, where they say that three oceans meet. The Bay of Bengal, the Indian Ocean, and the Arabian Sea. And so this little girl is like looking forward to this, and each of them have like want to go on this trip kind of for slightly different reasons. But at the end, when she gets to the end of the earth, she realizes what she has, which is the love between the three of them that really, transcends time and it transcends distance. And it's one of my favorite stories.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. That was great.
Thank
So
you.
let's get to some more questions about you.
Okay.
How has your work as a physician affected your books?
Hmm. I mean, I think that one of the things we are trained to do when we're doctors, and I'm a primary care doctor and I'm internal medicine doctor, um, we're trained to observe things through using all of our senses, right? So I think that paying attention to sensory detail also really helps one become a good writer. Um, but we're also trained to listen to people, right? And listen to their stories. And I'm privileged to have people share really like private, important things with me. And I think that being a good listener is really important to be a good doctor, but it's also really important as a writer to kind of listen to your characters and kind of understand where they're coming from. As a doctor, we're also trained to like listen to people and not make judgments, right? Like we're here to listen and try to help wherever they are. We're here to help them. And I think that helps a lot in kind of formulating characters and figuring out what they need to do and how they need to grow.
Interesting. How about your role as a mom?
Oh, wow. I know. It's how do I even encompass that? Like how do I even talk about that? I think that as a parent you like want the absolute best for your children. And at some point, my children are adults now. At some point you realize that they're out in the world and like you've done what you can do to like, help them, and then the rest of it is up to them. And it's a really hard um thing that we face, but it's of course what we need and want to happen, right? So, I don't know. I think that one of the interesting things about my role as a mom is that I think that my journey in becoming an author, kind of later in my life, so my children were able to witness it, right? They were able to like watch me, try to find an agent and like try to find a publisher and get lots of rejections and sometimes get acceptances and, the lows and the highs. And I think it was really interesting for them to see that because I think a lot of times when kids are younger, they think that we parents have all the answers, like everything, we're successful, everything's going great for us. And like, that's just, no one ever tells us no. And I think it was useful for my kids to see me try and not succeed right away and then keep trying.
Interesting. What would you tell your 10-year-old self?
Ooh, what would I tell my 10-year-old self? I was a pretty happy kid. I would tell my 10-year-old self to just like keep loving all the things that you love, keep doing all the things that you want to do, that you don't have to choose just one thing. And that the things that I was worried about, maybe not at 10, but definitely at 13, would all work out okay.
What about budding authors?
Ooh, what would I tell budding authors? I would tell them to read a lot and to write what they love and love what they write. And especially in a first draft, not to worry too much about whether it's good at all. But then when you revise, be ruthless.
Got it. So what's on the front burner?
So I mentioned Sona, that's coming out in a couple of weeks. I've also got a chapter book called Rohan Murthy Has a Plan. It is the second in a brand new series called The Kids in Mrs. Z's Class. And each book, there are 18 kids in the class, and each book is written by a different author. And we kind of like got to help create the town and the school and the classroom, and it's been a joy. And the first book in that series is written by Kate Mesner. It's called Emma McKenna Full Out, and Rohan Murthy and Emma McKenna are coming out on the same day, April 30th. And it's just those books are just so much fun, totally fun, and also like illustrated and just a joy. And I'm a part of a middle grade anthology that is coming out in April also. It's called The Doors Open, and it's a South Asian middle grade anthology edited by Hannah Khan. And it's just lovely with some amazing writers writing short stories and kind of an overall um, theme about a fictional community center at the center of it. And it's just absolutely, the stories are amazing. And then I have a picture book called Monty and Me coming out in November with Candlewick about a little girl who has a favorite auntie, but then her cousin comes to visit and is sharing, she's learning that she needs to share her auntie's time and she doesn't like it very much.
So what's on your bucket list? Your professional and your personal?
Ooh. Um, professionally, I've got a YA novel that is going to be coming next year. It's already written, so that's exciting. I've got a graphic novel idea that I'm thinking about, because I think that graphic novels are really fun and kids love them. I've got tons more picture books and novels coming in the future. What else? Personally, like I said, my kids are adults. I'm taking as much time when they can give me time. I'm taking as much of it as I can, and we're traveling.
Nice. Where do you want to
Yeah.
travel to?
We're going to Greece this summer, which will be amazing. Our
Oh,
first time.
wow.
Yeah.
Have fun.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
Did we miss anything?
I don't think so. This was a pretty comprehensive interview.
Good, good. So where can people find you?
So the best place is my website, www.rajanilarocca.com, RajaniLarocca.com. And I'm also on Instagram and Twitter.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This was awesome. It was
Thank
great.
you. This was a
I'm
wonderful
sure our
interview.
listeners are going to enjoy it.